My golden child brother stole my fiancée at my engagement party, and 6 months later, at our father Harold Whitmore's funeral, my mother introduced them to everyone as the perfect couple. She actually smiled when she said it. We were standing in a country club reception hall pretending grief had rules. Drew worked the room like a politician. Sarah clung to his arm in the black dress I'd bought her last Christmas, like the last year hadn't happened the way it did. And somehow I was still the disappointment. Ryan's always been different. Mom was telling the Andersons, loud enough for me to hear, not ambitious like Drew. He just plays with computers all day. What she didn't know, what Drew didn't know, was that the man they kept calling a shadow had quietly built something solid while they weren't looking. The envelope in my jacket pocket felt heavier by the minute. A personal letter from my father, sealed by his estate attorney, handed to me 30 minutes ago with one instruction. He insisted you read this before the will is opened tomorrow. Then my phone buzzed. A secured message from my internal forensics team sat at the top of my screen. Evidence package, Drew Whitmore, corporate data theft, urgent. 12 months of digital breadcrumbs, every illegal login, every stolen file, every transfer that didn't belong to him. Documented, time-stamped, admissible. See, while Drew thought he was stealing my life, I was quietly documenting his. While my mother kept selling a story where Drew was the hero and I was the problem, I was rewriting the narrative with receipts. And tomorrow, when that will gets read, Drew is going to learn what my father actually left him. He has no idea what's coming. Let me tell you how we got here. Growing up in the Whitmore house meant learning your place without anyone ever saying it out loud. Drew was 3 years older and everything Mom wanted in a son. Loud, confident, always the center of the room. I was the quiet one. Did my homework, fixed problems before they became problems, helped Dad with his accounting on weekends, and never asked for anything that would make anyone uncomfortable. The money made it obvious. Drew's college fund was $68,000. Mine was $12,000. Drew needs the boost, Dad said when I found the bank statements. You'll figure it out on your own. So I did, full scholarship to Carnegie Mellon, computer science, late nights in labs and server rooms, while Drew partied through 4 years at State and graduated with a communications major he never used. At my graduation, Mom had a migraine. Dad came alone, sat in the back, clapped once when my name was called, then left early. 2 years later, for Drew's graduation, they threw a party for 50 people and acted like they'd invented success. I learned early that being reliable didn't make you valued. It made you invisible. And invisibility teaches you things. How to watch people when they think no one's paying attention, how to listen for what they mean instead of what they say, how to build something solid while you're living in someone else's shadow. That's how I met Sarah Chen. She was a marketing consultant, sharp, composed, brilliant with brands, the kind of woman who saw potential where others saw too quiet or too different. We met at a tech conference in Austin. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into late-night conversations about everything except my family. Sarah respected work, real work, the kind that happens quietly, spreadsheets, contracts, late nights, long before anyone claps. When I proposed last year at that little French place on 5th Street, the restaurant where she'd landed her first major client, she said yes before I finished the question. The ring cost $18,000. Drew was still between plans, still talking big and living small. And that's the point. Drew has always wanted what I had. When we were kids, it was my things and my attention. As adults, it was stability, respect, a life that didn't need a spotlight to be real. I didn't build mine loudly, I quietly built it. And in a family like mine, that kind of success doesn't get celebrated. It gets targeted. The engagement party was supposed to be perfect because Sarah and I had built it that way. We picked the country club ballroom, trimmed the guest list down to 47 people, and splurged on champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spend on dinner. We only get engaged once, she'd said, laughing as she wrote out invitations by hand. I should have paid attention to how much Drew suddenly inserted himself into everything. How he had opinions about flowers and seating charts. How Sarah started asking what he thought before she asked me. Your brother has such good taste, she told me a week before the party, holding up centerpiece options he'd suggested. He has a better eye for this than most guys. That sentence should have landed heavier than it did. The night of the party, Sarah moved through the room in a navy dress I'd bought her for her birthday, smiling, gracious, perfect, except her orbit kept pulling toward Drew. When someone asked about wedding plans, she glanced at him first. When he told a story, she laughed a little too loud. When his hand touched her shoulder, she didn't step away. I remember realizing, with a kind of cold clarity, that I was watching my own engagement party from the wrong side of the spotlight, like I'd become background noise in a room I paid for. 2 hours in, Drew tapped his glass for attention. I assumed it was a toast. Brothers do that. For a second, I was almost grateful. Finally, some public acknowledgement that I'd done something worth celebrating. Drew wore that politician smile and said, "I have an announcement. Sarah and I have something to tell everyone." My stomach dropped before Sarah even moved. She stepped forward, didn't look at me, and slid my engagement ring, the one I'd bought, the one she'd been wearing since I proposed, off her finger. She set it down on the gift table like it was a place card she didn't need anymore. "Ryan is a wonderful person," she said, still not looking at me, "but sometimes you realize you've been standing next to the wrong future." The room went silent in that way people get when they're trying to decide whether they're witnessing a joke or a disaster. And then my mother broke the quiet first. "Oh," she said, smiling like she'd been waiting for this. "This is wonderful news." And my mother actually smiled. The weeks after the engagement party taught me something I hadn't expected. Being humiliated in front of 47 people clarifies things fast. My family expected me to process and move on. Mom called twice to check if I was handling everything okay, which was her way of asking if I was going to cause problems at family dinners. Drew left one voicemail, saying he hoped we could work past this like adults, as if stealing someone's future was a misunderstanding you could schedule around. I spent $3,200 on therapy sessions with Dr. Patel. Not because I was broken, but because I needed an objective voice to confirm what my gut already knew. A family that smiles when you're betrayed isn't a family. It's a hierarchy. So I stopped showing up. No more Sunday dinners, no more polite replies, no more pretending that sharing blood meant they were entitled to my peace. That's when I realized being alone was better than being invisible. About 3 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop on Market Street, actually reading, actually calm, when someone asked if the chair across from me was taken. Her name was Sabrina Hale, senior partner at one of the city's best corporate law firms. She was reviewing acquisition language over an espresso like it was a chessboard, not a document. "Tech startup?" she asked, nodding at my laptop. "AI solutions," I said. "Corporate automation." "Profitable?" "Very." She smiled, not politely, like she actually respected the answer. We talked for 2 hours. Market inefficiencies, scaling. The difference between building something that looks successful and building something solid. Sabrina didn't ask about my family. She didn't fish for drama. She listened to what I'd built and treated it like it mattered. While Drew was playing house with my ex-fiancée, I went back to work like the only thing that counted was what I could control. New contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. An expansion in Atlanta. Headcount holding steady around 300 employees across 4 states. Revenue for the year tracking right where it belonged, around 12 million, because I kept building in the quiet, where nobody applauded and nobody sabotaged. Drew, meanwhile, was getting rejection letters from banks. I knew because he'd started calling Dad more, and Dad still talked about financial stress the way other people talked about weather. "Drew's having some cash flow issues," Dad said during one of our rare calls. "Real estate market's been tough on him. Cash flow issues. That's what you call being broke when your ego can't handle the truth." But something else changed in those calls. Dad started asking different questions about my business, about my long-term plans, about whether Drew's investments were really solid or just looked solid from the outside. "You've always been the careful one," he said once, quieter than I'd ever heard him. Maybe being careful isn't such a bad thing after all. It was the first time in my life Dad sounded like he was looking at me instead of past me. And then the diagnosis landed like a door slamming. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months if we were lucky. Dad spent his first week in the hospital not talking about miracles, talking about paperwork. Calls to his attorney, updates to documents, questions about inheritance law that made Mom visibly uncomfortable. The kind of practical urgency that didn't care who was loudest in the room. Drew started getting nervous. Because for the first time, the family narrative wasn't being written by Mom's preferences or Drew's charm. It was being written by time, and Dad, finally, was choosing what would stay on the record. Desperate people make predictable mistakes. 2 weeks after Dad's diagnosis, my IT director called me on a secure line with the kind of careful tone people use when they already know the answer. Ryan, the monitoring we put in place last year just lit up, Marcus said. Someone is trying to get into your executive files using a legacy set of credentials from 2019, the account we deactivated when you upgraded our security protocols. I didn't have to ask who. Send me the logs, I said. This time, Drew got sloppy. The report showed 47 unauthorized login attempts over 6 days, password resets, multi-factor prompts, back-to-back failures, everything a desperate person does when they think rules bend for them. The IP trace didn't just point to the same downtown building Drew lived in, it hit his exact pattern. Late-night spikes, short bursts, then long gaps like he was waiting for someone else to clean up the mess. He managed to access 3 client folders and 2 internal strategy documents before our system locked him out for good. But the real damage wasn't the access. It was what he did next. Marcus highlighted the forwarding trail. Drew had pushed the files out to an external email address, one attached to our biggest competitor's domain. Clean timestamps, clean headers, digital fingerprints you couldn't explain away with misunderstanding. That evening, I slid the forensics report across Sabrina Hale's desk like I was passing her a menu. She read it once, then again, slower. "This isn't family drama," she said, voice steady. "This is corporate espionage, it's felony level. And because you've got a year of activity behind this, it's a pattern, not a mistake." Not yet," I said. Sabrina's eyes lifted. "You're sure?" I nodded. "Let him keep reaching. Let him keep lying. I want him to hand us the rope himself." Because Drew didn't understand the advantage of being the quiet one. He'd always performed in the spotlight. I'd always built in the shadow. And while he thought he was stealing my life, I was rewriting the narrative, line by line, timestamp by timestamp. While all of that was happening, Dad was having conversations that changed the air in every hospital room. After the first week, he stopped talking like a man bargaining with time. He started talking like a man tallying a legacy. "I made mistakes with you boys," he told me during what would become our last private conversation. His voice was thin, but his eyes were clear. "I thought Drew needed more help, more guidance. I thought you'd be fine on your own." He paused, breathing through the pain like it was a math problem he could solve if he stayed calm enough. But needing help and deserving it aren't the same thing, are they? "Dad," I started. "No," he said, cutting me off gently. "Let me finish. You built something solid, Ryan. Something real. Something that lasts. Drew..." He shook his head once. "Drew sells dreams. You deliver." It was the first time in my life he said it out loud. He told me he was sorry it took him so long to see clearly. 3 days later, Harold Whitmore died at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was there. Drew was not. He'd gone home to get some rest. Mom was in the cafeteria. It was just Dad, me, and machines that couldn't save him but could record the exact moment he was gone. 6 hours later, the estate attorney called with instructions that made my hands go cold. The will reading was set for Thursday at 2 p.m. at the family estate. There were sealed documents, updated as recently as last week. And there was a personal letter Dad insisted I read before the will was open. By Wednesday, Drew was already calling everyone he knew, talking about investment opportunities, and finally having real capital. He was planning how to spend his inheritance. He had no idea Dad had been planning something entirely different. Thursday arrived like a court date. The main library at the Whitmore estate was staged the way Mom liked to stage everything. Leather chairs in a tight circle, tissues on the side table, documents stacked square on the mahogany-like order itself could force the outcome she wanted. Afternoon light spilled through the tall windows that had watched 3 generations of Whitmores turn family into a financial system. Drew showed up 20 minutes early in his best suit, the same one he'd worn to Sarah's company Christmas party last year, acting like punctuality was proof of entitlement. He paced near Dad's desk, fingers dragging along the edge like he was already measuring what belonged to him. "Should be pretty straightforward," he told me when I walked in. "Dad always said the estate stays with the eldest. Traditional, simple." Mom nodded, already dabbing at dry eyes with tissues she'd brought specifically for the moment. I didn't argue, I didn't correct him, I just took my seat. Sabrina sat beside me, quiet, composed, a slim folder on her lap with a yellow tab peeking out like a warning label. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The estate attorney arrived last, expression neutral in that professional way that said he'd seen families collapse over money before. He opened the folder, smoothed the top page, and began. "To my son Andrew Whitmore," he read, voice steady. I leave the amount of $50,000 to be distributed immediately upon my death, with the understanding that this represents the final financial support he will receive from the Whitmore family estate. Drew didn't blink at first, like his brain refused to accept the sentence existed. Then his jaw tightened and his throat worked like he was trying to swallow a number that didn't fit. 50,000 wasn't a gift. It was a cutoff. To my son, Ryan Whitmore, the attorney continued, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all property, investments, business holdings, and liquid assets, with the understanding that he has proven himself capable of building something solid and lasting. Solid. The word landed like Dad's hand on my shoulder. Heavy, final, undeniable. The attorney moved into the asset breakdown with the same calm cadence he'd use for any file. The family home, $1.2 million. Investment portfolio, $3.7 million. Business holdings, $2.1 million. The lake property previously assessed at $800,000. Mom's tissues stopped mid-dab. Her hand froze like she was trying to decide whether tears still made sense. Drew stared at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language, like money was only real when it was his. The attorney lifted another envelope. My father's handwriting was clear on the front, for Ryan. There is also a personal letter from Harold Whitmore, the attorney said, turning it so everyone could see. Your father instructed that it be read aloud in the presence of immediate family. Drew's fingers flexed against his knee like he wanted to grab it. Mom's eyes narrowed like she wanted to stop it. The attorney broke the seal and began reading, voice measured, trying to sound like my father without pretending he could. Dear Ryan, I'm sorry it took me so long to see clearly. For too many years, I mistook noise for strength and quiet for weakness. I watched you build something real while your brother talked about building things. I watched you solve problems while he created them. Mom's face tightened like the letter was insulting her personally. You were the son who helped with my books on weekends. You were the one who called during the diagnosis, not to ask for anything, but to ask how I was holding up. You built something solid in the shadow of a family that never gave you the spotlight you deserved. Shadow. Dad naming it out loud made the room feel colder. By the time you read this, you'll know I left you everything. Not because I love Drew any less, but because love sometimes means letting someone face the consequences of their choices. I hope he learns from this. I know you'll use it wisely. Dad. The last word hit the table like a gavel. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then Drew did what he always did when he didn't get his way. This isn't right, he said, voice rising fast. Dad was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. This whole thing is a mistake. His eyes snapped to me like I'd committed a crime by being the one Dad finally saw. You did this, he said. You got to him when he was vulnerable. You manipulated a dying man. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself with feelings. I didn't need to. I looked at the attorney. The will was updated last week, I said, calm as a status report. If Drew has objections, he can put them in writing. Drew's face twisted. He turned to Mom like she could override legal documents the way she'd overridden reality his entire life. This family's estate goes to the eldest, he said, louder now. It's tradition. Ryan doesn't even need it. He has his little computer business. This is my inheritance. Little computer business. And still, he couldn't stop trying to shrink me into a footnote. The attorney cleared his throat, patient, controlled. Mr. Whitmore, he said, there is one more document. He set a professionally bound report on the table. A land survey, stamped, dated, recent. Your father commissioned an updated assessment of the lake property, the attorney continued. It appears the land has significant development potential that was not reflected in prior evaluations. Current market value is estimated at $3.2 million. Mom made a small sound, sharp, involuntary, like she'd been punched with math. Drew's head snapped up. The lake place wasn't just a cabin. It was value, it was leverage, it was Dad making sure the truth survived him. Sabrina didn't smile, she simply slid her tabbed folder forward by an inch. Silent confirmation this wasn't speculation. Drew looked around the circle like someone would laugh and reset the scene back to the version where he always won. Nobody moved. Because for the first time in my life, the Whitmore family narrative wasn't being written by tradition or my mother's preferences. It was being written by receipts. And Drew, finally, wasn't the author anymore. The will reading was Thursday. By Friday evening, Sabrina and I were back in my office planning what came next. Sabrina spread Marcus's forensics report across my desk. Clean timelines, hashed log files, chain of custody notes, no drama, just proof. Drew didn't just snoop, she said. He tried 47 times over 6 days using the legacy 2019 credentials. He got in, he pulled files, he forwarded them out. That's intent, not curiosity. She opened our corporate bylaws on her laptop and rotated the screen toward me. You're a founder, she continued. You can call an emergency board session for a security incident. Not as revenge, because you have a duty to your employees, your clients, and your company. That was the piece Drew never respected. The parts of my life that were solid because they ran on rules, not on mom's feelings. Dad had helped me incorporate 6 years ago. He'd insisted on proper governance, clear voting rights, clear procedures, clear records. Drew had never read any of it. He'd always assumed family would protect him from consequences, even inside a business he tried to sabotage. Sabrina didn't smile. She didn't have to. We scheduled the emergency session for Monday, she said. Agenda, security breach review, evidence package attached, board vote on next steps, civil action, referral to law enforcement, and immediate protective measures. I nodded, then hesitated because the fallout was already spreading. Mom had left 3 voicemails since Thursday, each one sharper than the last. Ryan, we need to talk about this Will situation. Drew is devastated. This isn't how family handles things. Sarah sent 2 texts. The first tried to explain herself. The second asked if we could talk like adults. Like an engagement party betrayal was a scheduling conflict. By Saturday, relatives I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly passionate about family loyalty. People who ignored me for decades were now worried I was dividing the family. I slid my phone to Sabrina without a word. She scrolled once, then looked up. They're trying to make you feel guilty for existing in the spotlight Drew thinks belongs to him. What if they're right? I asked. What if I should just let the corporate part go? Sabrina's voice stayed calm. Ryan, Drew attempted felony corporate espionage. He tried to hurt your company to solve his cash flow problems. Mercy doesn't erase risk. She tapped the forensics report. And if you bury this because it's family, you're telling your board and your staff that rules are optional for the golden child. That landed. So we did what we always did. We documented, we prepared, we removed emotion from the process and left only facts. If Drew claimed it was accidental, we had the forwarding logs. If he blamed technical issues, we had IP address matches and timestamps. If he tried to hide behind family, we had corporate policy that applied to everyone, especially people with privileged access histories. Sabrina made one thing clear. We don't threaten, we don't rant, we put it on the record. By Monday morning, I sent the meeting invites, emergency session, security incident review, evidence packets attached. An hour later, Drew got the formal notice that the board was reviewing a breach tied to his access history, and that he could attend to respond with counsel if he chose. I could picture his face when he read it, the moment the family story cracked. Because for the first time in his life, Drew wasn't dealing with mom's excuses or tradition or noise. He was dealing with something I'd quietly built in the shadow, a system that didn't care who he was. It only cared what he did. Monday morning arrived like Judgment Day. The boardroom at Whitmore Solutions looked exactly like what it was. Serious money making serious decisions. Glass walls, a polished table, leather chairs, and 5 evidence packets placed in front of 5 voting members, 2 external investors, our CFO, our head of operations, and me. Sabrina sat beside me, calm and unreadable, a slim legal pad in front of her. Counsel welcome, bulletproof. Drew walked in wearing his engagement party suit and an expression that still thought this could be talked away. He'd brought Sarah. She sat in the corner chair like moral support, clutching a coffee that had probably gone cold. Drew had sold her the same story he sold everyone, that this was a misunderstanding, a business formality, something he could smooth over with charm. He was wrong. Thank you for accommodating this emergency session, I said, voice steady as a quarterly report. This meeting is titled Emergency Session, Security Incident Review for a reason. Over the last several months, we've monitored anomalies. Last week, we confirmed a breach attempt pattern that escalated into documented theft. I nodded to Marcus. Marcus didn't dramatize anything. He didn't need to. He walked the board through the timeline like it was math. 47 unauthorized access attempts over 6 days, he said. Legacy credentials from 2019 that should have been inactive. 3 client files accessed, 2 internal strategy documents accessed, and the contents forwarded to external addresses associated with a competitor. Drew's face changed in degrees, confusion, then recognition, then a thin film of panic he couldn't quite hide. Marcus clicked to the Ames level clean slides, timestamps, access paths, forwarding logs. The IP address traces indicate the access originated from Andrew Whitmore's residential internet connection. Marcus continued, geolocation corroborates the pattern with his known schedule and location history. Our CFO leaned forward. Andrew, you understand this creates exposure for the company and our clients, potential criminal liability. Drew opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Our head of operations turned one page in the packet and looked at me. The board needs to vote on next steps, specifically whether we instruct outside counsel to refer this to law enforcement and pursue prosecution. That's when Drew finally found his voice. This is ridiculous, he said, looking around the table like someone would laugh and reset the scene. I'm family. Ryan, tell them this is a mistake. I didn't look at him. I looked at the board. The evidence speaks for itself, I said. Corporate theft doesn't become less illegal because the person doing it shares my last name. We have a duty to our employees and our clients. If we don't enforce our security protocols equally, we don't deserve anyone's trust. Equally, Drew's voice cracked. After Dad's will, now you want to destroy what's left? The board shifted, not out of sympathy, but discomfort. This wasn't family drama to them, it was liability, it was risk, it was breach. Drew stood up, pointing at the packets like they were lies instead of timestamps. You've been planning this, he said. The will, the evidence, all of it. You manipulated Dad, and now you're doing this because you're jealous. Sarah chose me. I finally looked at him. Drew, I said, calm as still water, you tried to sell client data because you couldn't pay rent. That isn't jealousy, that's a crime. The room went silent except for his breathing. You've spent your whole life trying to keep me in the shadow, I continued, but shadows don't log in 47 times. Shadows don't forward files to competitors. Shadows don't sabotage the businesses their brothers quietly built. Drew's face twisted. Your shadow? You think you're... I think I'm done, I said, with you treating my work like your backup plan, with you confusing noise for power. I turned back to the board. Motion, instruct outside counsel to refer Andrew Whitmore to law enforcement and proceed with prosecution per corporate policy. Zeta seconded, our CFO said immediately. Sabrina's pen moved once, quiet, precise, capturing the moment like a receipt. All in favor? The head of operations asked. 5 hands went up, mine included. Drew stared at the unanimous vote like it was written in a language he didn't recognize. Ryan, Sarah's voice came small from the corner. Everyone turned. She was looking at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time since the engagement party. I didn't know, she said, about the corporate stuff. He told me your company was just small. Stealing tends to require minimizing the thing you're stealing from, I said, without heat. Just fact. Sarah's face crumpled. She looked at Drew, really looked at him. And for the first time, the charm didn't work. Drew, she said quietly, you said he was exaggerating. Drew didn't answer. He couldn't, because the truth was bigger than his version of it, and for once, he couldn't talk his way out. The board members filed out in controlled silence, because that's what professionals do when they've just ended someone's career. When the room emptied, I didn't gloat. I didn't chase Drew. I just sat there for 3 minutes, staring at the glass wall like I was watching the old story finally break. Quietly built. Solid. Then I called my mother. "Sarah, Mom," I said when she picked up. The board voted unanimously. Drew is being referred for prosecution. This isn't a family argument anymore. Silence. Then her voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it. Ryan, I don't understand. When did I stop being the problem? I asked. When I stopped letting you write the narrative. More silence. I think, she said finally, your father saw things we didn't want to see. For the first time in my life, the Whitmore family story was being written by the son who had actually earned the right to hold the pen. 6 months later, everything was different. Quietly different. The kind of change that happens when truth finally gets more space than tradition. Drew pleaded guilty to corporate espionage. The plea deal came with an 18-month sentence and restitution. Because family doesn't erase felony logins and forwarded files. Sarah didn't stick around to watch him explain it. After she walked away in that parking lot, She went back to her life, and the noise stopped being my problem. Sunday dinners became optional instead of obligatory. When I showed up, I wasn't a footnote. When I didn't, nobody tried to guilt me into performing forgiveness. Mom even asked real questions about the company, about the board, about what I was building. Like my answers finally mattered. We had lunch last Tuesday, just the two of us. No speeches, no rewriting history. She stared into her coffee and said, "Your father knew what he was doing." I nodded, calm, solid, done. Sabrina and I got married without an audience hungry for drama. We spent our honeymoon at the lake property everyone used to call just a cabin, walking the land that survey proved was worth far more than anyone admitted. While other people chased spotlights, we planned what came next. Quietly built, legally clean, impossible to steal. The family narrative didn't collapse. It corrected itself. I never had to explain my worth again.